In the winter of 1936, a blizzard buried eastern Montana under 4 feet of snow for 11 days straight. Power lines snapped, roads disappeared. Every store within 40 miles was unreachable. Not a single family on those homesteads went hungry. Not one child froze. Not one family sat in darkness. Because every man, woman, and child on those ranches knew exactly what their grandparents had taught them. FEMA's own data shows fewer than 17% of American families today have more than 3 days of emergency supplies. 3 days! Your great-grandmother could feed her family for 6 months from her root cellar alone. We didn't lose these skills by accident. One of them is fined in 38 American cities today. One was federally banned for 81 years. One got Colorado homeowners prosecuted as recently as 2014. These weren't primitive tricks. They were battle-tested survival systems built by people who died if they got them wrong. Here are 41 of them. 41. Grandma's wood-burning cook stove, the life support system they're now fining you for. Your great-grandmother's cast-iron cook stove was not an appliance. It was a life support system. It cooked 3 meals a day, heated the kitchen through Montana winters that hit 40 below, dried herbs and wet clothing on the warming rack, provided hot water through the side reservoir, sterilized medical equipment, rendered lard, processed soap, and canned the summer harvest. One stove, no utility connection, no supply chain, no manufactured parts beyond the iron itself, which outlasted everyone who ever cooked on it. In 19 states today, new wood stoves require EPA 2020 certification, adding $800 to $2,000 to the base cost. In 38 municipalities, Denver, Seattle, Salt Lake City, the entire San Francisco Bay Area, operating a non-certified stove on an air quality action day carries fines between $200 and $1,000 per day. We replaced it with forced air natural gas systems dependent on an uninterrupted supply chain from the Texas Permian Basin to your furnace. When that chain broke for 4 million Texans in February 2021, the fine-free alternative left families freezing. Your great-grandmother never paid a utility bill for heat. She paid with wood fire she cut herself. 40. Grandpa's Cold Smokehouse, the ham that lasted 18 months without refrigeration. When a rancher slaughtered a steer in October, the question wasn't what to do with the meat today, it was how to make it last until April. The answer was a cedar smokehouse, a fire pit 4 feet from the hanging rack, and hickory burned to coals before any meat came near it. Cold smoke, below 90 degrees Fahrenheit, penetrates meat over 7 to 14 days, creating an antimicrobial surface layer through phenol compounds in the wood smoke. A properly cold-smoked ham lasted 18 months on an open shelf. No refrigeration, no nitrates, no vacuum sealing. A 2015 study in the journal Meat Science confirmed traditional cold smoking achieves bacterial reduction equivalent to modern commercial preservatives without a single chemical additive. Commercial deli ham lasts 11 days refrigerated and contains sodium nitrite, listed as a probable human carcinogen since 2015. Grandpa's ham lasted 18 months on an open shelf. The smokehouse cost nothing but cedar planks and labor. 39. Grandpa's signal mirror, the $8 tool that could have saved 311 lives. Every frontier scout carried a piece of polished metal capable of flashing reflected sunlight miles away. The U.S. Army's heliograph system transmitted Morse code up to 30 miles under clear sky from 1877 through World War II. No batteries, no frequencies, no infrastructure. In the 2018 Camp Fire, cell towers in Paradise were destroyed within the first 2 hours. Over 30% of residents received no evacuation warning before fire reached their streets. 311 people were found sheltering in place days after the fire, alive but unreachable. A signal mirror weighs 2 ounces, costs under $8, reaches a helicopter at 6 miles, and never needs charging. The U.S. Army issued them as standard equipment for over 60 years. Grandpa carried one. Most Americans today have never seen one. 39. Grandma's wild yeast starter. 175 years from a single culture. Every frontier family kept a starter, a living culture of wild yeast and lactobacillus bacteria in a ceramic crock, fed with nothing but flour and water, producing enough leavening to bake bread indefinitely without purchasing a single packet of commercial yeast. The sourdough culture at Budam Bakery in San Francisco has been maintained continuously since 1849, 175 years from one original starter. During the COVID-19 lockdowns of 2020, sourdough starter searches on Google increased over 300% in a single week as store yeast vanished entirely. Grandma never searched for yeast. She kept it alive in a crock and passed it to her daughter, who passed it to hers. Commercial yeast, introduced widely after 1945, made bread faster and made every American household dependent on an unbroken supply chain for one of the most basic foods in human history. The community water well. How shared infrastructure made strangers into neighbors. The hand-dug community well wasn't just water infrastructure. It was the physical and social foundation of every sustainable frontier settlement. Maintained by shared labor and shared cost, it provided clean water to dozens of families from a single source. And it was the reason people knew their neighbors, the gathering point where information traveled, mutual aid organized, and community identity formed around a shared physical need. Today, rural America is almost entirely privatized at the household level. Individual wells, individual pumps, household filters. In a prolonged power outage, every electric pump fails independently and silently. Nobody knows until someone knocks on a door. Grandma drew water from the community well every morning, alongside the same 8 families who would have shown up at her door in any emergency, because the well had already made them neighbors in the truest sense. We privatized water. We called it progress. Grandpa and the rainwater barrel, the skill Colorado prosecuted until 2016. Every homestead in the dry territories collected rainwater from the roof. A standard 2,000-square-foot barn roof in a region receiving 12 inches of annual rainfall collects roughly 15,000 gallons per year, channeled into buried clay tanks, watering kitchen gardens and livestock without touching the primary well. Between 1872 and 1960, 47 states passed prior appropriation water laws classifying precipitation as the legal property of downstream rights holders. A Douglas County, Colorado homeowner received a cease and desist in 2014 for a 55-gallon rain barrel on his own property. That same year, Nestle paid $230 annually for a permit to extract 1 million gallons of groundwater per day from a Michigan aquifer for commercial bottling. A corporation extracting 1 million gallons a day pays $230 a year. A homeowner collecting rain from his own roof faces a $500 fine per barrel. This was not about conservation. It was about who owned the infrastructure of survival itself. Grandma and Grandpa's root cellar, a precision temperature management system maintaining interior conditions within a 5-degree range year-round, no power required. North-facing slope for shade, entry away from prevailing winds, double-door vestibule to prevent temperature spikes, ventilation pipes at floor level for cold air intake, ceiling level for warm exhaust, stone-lined walls for thermal mass. The result? 32 to 40 degrees in winter, 45 to 55 in summer. Root vegetables preserved 6 to 8 months, apples 5 months, cured meats up to 18 months. The Department of Energy estimates residential refrigeration accounts for 13% of household electricity consumption. Grandma's root cellar consumed 0, built once with a shovel and 1 hard week of labor. 34. Grandpa's flint and steel, the skill Texans burned their furniture without. Every Oregon Trail traveler carried the same fire kit: high-carbon steel, a chunk of flint, and a tin of dried amadou fungus or shredded cedar bark. A skilled frontiersman produced a reliable coal in under 30 seconds and had a working fire within 2 minutes under most conditions. Nothing manufactured beyond the steel striker, which lasted a lifetime. When Winter Storm Uri hit Texas in February 2021, thousands of residents burned furniture for heat because they had no other option and no knowledge of safer alternatives. Grandpa could start a fire in a blizzard with a rock and a piece of fungus. He never once considered what he'd do if manufactured fire starters were unavailable. That question had no meaning in his world. 23. Grandpa's adobe walls, the heating system he built once and never paid for again. Adobe walls 18 to 36 inches thick absorbed heat during the day and released it slowly through the night, holding interior temperatures within a 15-degree range even when outdoors swung from 105 at noon to 48 before dawn. University of New Mexico research published in 2019 found an 18-inch adobe wall performs the equivalent of roughly R28 insulation in desert climates. In a grid-down scenario, a modern stick frame house loses interior temperature at roughly 4 degrees Fahrenheit per hour once the HVAC stops. An adobe structure loses less than half a degree per hour. Grandpa built his walls once. He never paid a utility bill for their performance again. 32. The Signal Fire Network, 15 miles of communication without a single wire. Every frontier settlement maintained a signal fire system, pre-stacked wood at a high point on each property, with a smoke sequence that meant specific things. 1 column, come quickly. 2 columns, stay away. 3, everyone gather. Borrowed from indigenous communication methods across the Great Plains, it allowed communities spread across 15 miles to coordinate within minutes using nothing manufactured. During the 2018 Camp Fire, over 30% of Paradise residents received no digital evacuation alert before fire reached residential streets. A smoke signal from the ridge above town would have been visible to every household within 8 miles in under 3 minutes. 31. Grandma's wood ash soap, the zero-cost system that built a $32 billion industry. Fire made ash. Ash made lye. Slaughter made fat. Lye plus fat made soap. Nothing purchased, nothing wasted. A fully closed system producing enough soap to clean clothing, dishes, surfaces, and bodies for an entire year from materials that were byproducts of normal homestead operations. A pound of lard and 6 ounces of lye produces roughly a pound of finished soap. Hardwood ash from 3 cords of winter firewood yields enough potassium for the entire family's annual supply. Today, commercial soap manufacturing is a $32 billion global industry. The raw materials Grandma used were waste products she would have thrown away.
30. The Frontier Skill Sharing Network. Why Grandma's neighbor was worth more than any insurance policy. What made frontier communities resilient wasn't that every person knew everything. It was that every community contained the complete survival skill set distributed across neighbors who traded knowledge and labor freely. One family had the blacksmith, another had the midwife, another knew the medicine plants. They didn't compete
because in a world without safety nets, a neighbor's skill was a direct insurance policy on your own family's survival. A 2020 American Enterprise Institute survey found over 40% of Americans report no close friends in their neighborhood, up from 22% in 2000. In a grid-down scenario exceeding 2 weeks, the disaster response research is unambiguous. Communities with strong pre-existing social networks survive at dramatically higher rates. Grandma didn't survive the winter of 1917 because she was individually prepared. She survived because she knew every family within 5 miles. 29. Grandma's lacto-fermented crocks. 30 pounds of cabbage fermented in its own brine for 3 weeks provided vitamin C through winter months when fresh produce was weeks away. Lacto-fermented vegetables in salt brine remain fully edible for 6 to 12 months at room temperature without refrigeration or heat treatment. A 2021 study in Applied and Environmental Microbiology confirmed lacto-fermented vegetables produce antimicrobial lactic acid concentrations sufficient to prevent pathogen growth for over 8 months at cellar temperature. The canning industry replaced fermentation as the dominant home preservation method by 1960. Fermented foods require no cans, no processing equipment, no supply chain. That's precisely why the industry had an interest in replacing them. 28. Grandpa's hemp rope, the plant George Washington grew, banned for 81 years. Hemp rope produced from 1 acre of plants had tensile strength of several thousand pounds and lasted 15 to 20 years of regular use. George Washington grew hemp at Mount Vernon for rope production. The Continental Army used it for virtually all naval rigging during the Revolutionary War. Commercial hemp cultivation was federally prohibited between 1937 and 2018, 81 years, during which DuPont's nylon products, introduced in 1938, became the only legal option for American consumers. DuPont held 17 patents on synthetic fiber when hemp prohibition took effect. Grandpa twisted hemp rope in his barn. The law changed, the physics did not. 27. Grandpa's hand pump well, the backup 98% of Americans no longer have. A cast iron hand pump required zero electricity, zero fuel, and no moving parts beyond a leather cup washer replaceable with any scrap of thick hide. It pulled water from 60 feet below ground at roughly 5 gallons per minute. Today, fewer than 2% of American homes with well water maintain a functional hand pump backup. When the grid fails, those homes have no water access at all. After Hurricane Sandy in 2012, hand-pumped private wells were the only consistent residential water source in rural zones throughout outages lasting up to 3 weeks. Grandpa never thought about losing water access. Power had nothing to do with it. 26. Grandma's tallow candles, 60 in a box versus the modern household's 3. Every ranch kitchen kept 40 to 60 hand-dipped tallow candles under the pantry shelf. Beef fat rendered from the autumn slaughter poured around cotton wicking into tin molds. Each burned 4 hours. A family of 6 could light their home through an entire Wyoming winter on 12 pounds of tallow at zero cost. When the 2021 Texas ice storm knocked out power to 4 million homes, candle supplies sold out across 5 states in 18 hours. Hardware stores rationed them at 2 per customer. Grandma had 60. The American Lung Association confirmed in 2018 that modern paraffin candles release benzene and toluene when burned, both classified as potential carcinogens. Grandma's candle was beef fat and a cotton string. 25. Grandpa's bark-tanned leather, the creek and the oak tree versus chromium waste. Frontier families made their own leather by soaking fresh hides in increasingly concentrated oak or hemlock bark liquor solutions over 4 to 6 weeks. Oak tannins bind permanently to collagen proteins in animal hide, the same chemistry modern tanneries use, substituting synthesized chemicals for bark. Commercial leather production today relies on chromium sulfate tanning that produces chromium-contaminated water waste classified as hazardous industrial waste by the EPA. Grandpa's bark-tanned harness required a creek, a pile of oak bark, and 6 weeks. It produced no hazardous waste and cost nothing but labor. 24. Grandpa's sand and charcoal filter, the tin can that matches a $300 filter. Coarse gravel, fine sand, and wood charcoal packed into a perforated tin can or hollowed lock, water passed through all 3 layers emerged visibly clear and free of the particulate contamination responsible for most waterborne illness. The Berkey water filter, retailing at $250 to $400, uses a 2-stage compressed carbon system operating on identical physics. Grandpa's version cost nothing and was built for materials within 100 yards of any campsite. 0 manufactured components required beyond the container. 23. Grandpa's draft horses, 21 million down to 3 million. Every pre-1940 farm maintained horse-drawn equipment for every essential task. When the tractor broke, the horses were there. When wartime fuel rationing hit, the horses ate prass. Draft horse numbers dropped from 21 million in 1915 to fewer than 3 million by 1960. In a prolonged grid-down scenario exceeding 30 days, most American agricultural operations could not plant, cultivate, or harvest crops of any kind. The knowledge to work horses in harness, once universal among rural Americans, now resides with fewer than 1% of the population. 22. Grandma's seed envelopes, so next year was never in doubt. Paper envelopes and cloth pouches, labeled in pencil, hung from the pantry rafters. At harvest time, before anything was eaten or preserved, a portion dried on muslin and was sealed for next year's planting. The kitchen garden never depended on a seed catalog or a supply chain. The modern commercial seed industry processes over $45 billion annually. Seed saving requires no purchase and no catalog, only the knowledge that seeds are not a consumable product. They are a reproductive system that replaces itself every year if you let it. Grandma knew which tomato to leave on the vine 3 extra weeks. Her daughter knew it. The knowledge traveled in the envelope alongside the seed. 21. Grandma's willow bark, the medicine that worked for 10,000 years until the paperwork changed. Willow bark steeped in water provided reliable fever reduction through salicin, the compound Bayer synthesized into aspirin in 1897. Yarrow stopped bleeding through natural vasoconstrictive compounds. A 2017 study in Nutrients confirmed elderberry syrup reduced influenza duration by an average of 4 days compared to placebo. Grandma had no pharmacy within 40 miles. She had 10 generations of transmitted knowledge, every plant used exactly as her mother had used it. The FDA's 1994 Dietary Supplement Act made it federally illegal to claim any plant product treats or prevents disease without approval costing $1 to $2 million per compound. The willow bark didn't change, only the paperwork required to call it medicine. 20. The root cellar water cache, 60 times the FEMA standard. Ceramic jugs sealed with beeswax stoppers and buried 3 feet below the frost line kept drinking water at a constant 53 degrees through summer heat and winter freeze. A well-stocked cellar held 200 to 500 gallons in ceramic and glass containers, requiring no power, no pump, and no filter. FEMA currently recommends 1 gallon per person per day for a minimum of 3 days. Grandma's root cellar held 60 times that amount without a single piece of equipment manufactured after 1850. 19. The kerosene lamp station, 12 cents a gallon versus $120 during a blackout. 4 to 8 lamps of different sizes, a 1-gallon tin of kerosene stored in a cool outbuilding, spare cotton wicks. The entire system cost under $3 in 1910 and provided reliable light for a family of 6 through the longest winter nights without any external supply chain. A single gallon provides roughly 40 hours of reading light and stores safely for 5 years. During the 2021 Texas blackout, residents paid $60 to $120 per gallon for lamp oil from emergency vendors. Grandma paid 12 cents. She bought it every autumn without drama. 21. Grandma's Zier pot. 2 clay pots, some sand, and a 30-degree temperature drop. 2 unglazed ceramic pots, one nested inside the other with wet sand packed between them. As water evaporated through the outer pot's porous walls, it drew heat from the interior, dropping temperatures inside by up to 30 degrees Fahrenheit below ambient air. Research from Ahmadu Bello University documented shelf life extension for tomatoes from 2 days to 21 and eggplant from 1 day to 27, using zero electricity. In the 2021 Texas blackout, over 3,000 insulin-dependent residents reported medication spoilage. The Zier pot cost under $8 in materials. Grandma's weather eye, reading the sky when there was no forecast. Red sky at morning reflects actual atmospheric optics. Dust and moisture in a high-pressure system moving east produce red morning light when that system has passed and a low-pressure front is approaching from the west. Meteorological analysis published in the Bulletin of the American Meteorological Society in 2010 found predictive accuracy between 65 and 75% in continental mid-latitude climates. Grandma watched smoke rise straight from her chimney and knew the weather would hold. She watched it curl back down and knew a storm was coming before the clouds appeared. She was right often enough that her family survived every winter she ever faced. 16. Grandma's quilts, the insulation technology hiding in the hope chest. Worn clothing, flour sacks, and fabric scraps layered into double batting quilts provided warmth equivalent to a modern sleeping bag rated to 15 degrees, made entirely from materials that would otherwise have been discarded. Hung over windows, a quilt reduced cold infiltration significantly. Laid against a door gap, it stopped draft. Wrapped around a ceramic hot water vessel, it became a radiant heat source lasting hours. Grandma didn't buy warmth, she made it from what was already worn out. 15. Grandpa's cattail, the survival plant that fed, insulated, and tied everything together. The starchy root, dried and ground, produced flour for bread and porridge. Young shoots, eaten raw, tasted similar to cucumber. Dried seed heads burned as makeshift torches and provided tinder. Leaves, braided while green, produced serviceable cordage. Seed down served as wound dressing and bed-in insulation. The cattail was present at nearly every creek and marsh across North America. Grandpa knew every cattail marsh within 5 miles, not as scenery, but as a supply depot that restocked itself every year. 14. The communal barn raising, when labor was the currency and neighbors were the bank. A family needed a barn. They called on neighbors. The neighbors came. The barn went up in a day. The family fed everyone who showed up. No wages, no contracts, no payment. The debt was paid forward to the next family that called, because everyone understood that today's borrower was tomorrow's lender. The research on disaster recovery is unambiguous. Social capital, the density and depth of pre-existing community relationships, predict survival outcomes more reliably than individual preparedness in every major study since Hurricane Katrina. 12. Grandpa's brain tanning. Every animal comes with exactly enough brain to tan its own hide. A frontier saying that encapsulates a complete leather-making system requiring no purchased chemicals. Brain matter worked thoroughly into a de-haired hide and smoked produces soft, supple leather, more breathable than chrome-tanned commercial product. Native American hide workers perfected this technique over thousands of years. Grandpa learned it from the same tradition. The process requires no industrial equipment and no supply chain beyond the animal itself. 11. Grandma and Grandpa's foraging knowledge. What every frontier child knew before age 10. Wild onions, lamb's quarters, purslane, watercress, dandelion, rose hips, elderberries, each with a season, a preparation method, and a purpose. Every child on the frontier learned to identify edible and medicinal plants within walking distance before they learned to read. The knowledge was transmitted by walking, pointing, tasting, and doing. A 2019 National Gardening Association survey found fewer than 15% of Americans can reliably identify 5 wild edible plants in their own region. Grandma didn't forage as a hobby. She foraged because the land around her was a larder she had memorized since childhood, and it never closed. Number 10. Grandma's lard, the multi-purpose fat that did what 12 products do today. Rendered pork lard served for frying, baking, waterproofing leather, lubricating tools and wagon axles, conditioning cast iron, treating cracked skin, and as a base for medicinal salves. One well-rendered tin stored in a cool cellar provided months of utility across a dozen applications. The American vegetable oil industry spent decades funding research characterizing saturated animal fats as dietary hazards while promoting refined seed oils. The scientific consensus on that question has shifted considerably in the last 15 years. Meanwhile, a jar of lard remains one of the most versatile and shelf-stable substances a household can keep, exactly as it was in every frontier kitchen from Maine to California. Number 8. Grandma's zero-waste fat rendering. Nothing left on the table. Every gram of fat trimmed from butchering was saved and rendered at the end of each week. Beef tallow, pork lard, and poultry fat rendered separately, strained through cloth, and stored in ceramic containers, each with specific uses. Tallow for candles and leather treatment, lard for cooking and skin care, poultry fat for cooking and waterproofing. The fat going down your kitchen drain today was, in your great-grandmother's kitchen, next month's candles, this week's pie crust, and tomorrow's axle grease, from a substance she would never have considered throwing away. Number 8. Grandma's dried herb bundles, the pharmacy she grew herself. Thyme and oregano for cooking and respiratory complaints, chamomile for sleep and digestion, yarrow for wound care, peppermint for fever and digestion, lavender for headaches and antiseptic use. The knowledge of which plant to use and how to prepare it was considered basic literacy, as fundamental as knowing how to bake bread. Transmitted entirely within families, from mothers to daughters over generations. Grandma didn't consider herself an herbalist. She considered herself a competent woman who knew how to take care of her family. Number 7. Grandma's kitchen garden as pharmacy, medicine, and dinner from the same soil. Garlic for preservation and infection prevention. Horseradish for respiratory congestion. Calendula for wound salve. Echinacea for immune support. Feverview for headache and fever. The same beds, the same tending, the same harvest, serving both purposes simultaneously. The separation between food and medicine that modern culture treats as categorical did not exist in the frontier household. The garden fed the family. The same garden healed them. Grandma did not distinguish between the two because in practice there was no distinction to make.
Grandma's apple scrap vinegar, the cleaning agent made from what would have been thrown away. Apple cores, peels, and damaged sections set aside during preservation season, combined with water and a small amount of sugar in a ceramic crock, covered with cloth, and left to ferment over several weeks. The result? Raw apple cider vinegar used for food preservation, wound cleaning, surface disinfecting, hair rinsing, and cooking. Bragg apple cider vinegar retails at $8 to $12 a bottle. Grandma produced the same product for free from scraps she would otherwise have composted. The product did not improve. The supply chain simply moved it from her crock to a store shelf and attached a price tag. Grandpa's rock and earthen dam. Water diversion without a single permit. Rock and earthen dams across seasonal creek channels redirected flow into irrigation ditches, serving kitchen gardens and livestock tanks, built by hand from creekbed materials, requiring no permits, no concrete, no purchased materials. The Bureau of Reclamation, established in 1902, began the permitting process that progressively regulated small-scale water diversion throughout the 20th century. Today, a homeowner in most Western states needs a water rights permit, environmental impact assessment, and often a state engineer's approval to build even a temporary rock diversion on a seasonal creek on their own property. Grandpa moved rocks. The creek went where he needed it. The garden grew. Grandma's animal barometer, the livestock that read weather better than any instrument. Cattle moving to lower ground and facing away from the prevailing wind indicated a front within 12 hours. Horses becoming restless and refusing water, often within 6 hours of a storm. Swallows flying low as insects stayed close to the ground under falling atmospheric pressure. Bees returning to the hive 2 to 3 hours before rain. These observations reflected the fact that animals respond to atmospheric pressure changes, electromagnetic shifts, and infrasound patterns that precede storms, with sensory equipment far more sensitive than any 19th century instrument. Grandpa watched his horses. When they told him a storm was coming, he believed them. Grandma's mending basket, the repair economy that made everything last. Thread, needles, patches cut from worn-out garments, buttons salvaged from anything beyond repair, worn shirts patched at the elbows, socks darned at the heel, worn trouser knees becoming patches for the next pair. A garment's life ending only when its last usable fiber had been repurposed into something else. The EPA estimates the average American today discards approximately 81 pounds of clothing per year. The fast fashion industry became dominant precisely when the mending basket disappeared from American households, roughly between 1955 and 1975. A needle and thread cost almost nothing. The skill costs an hour to learn. Grandma considered mending as basic as cooking. She was right. 2. Grandma's beeswax, the sealant, preservative, and waterproofing that came from the garden. Rubbed into wood, it sealed against moisture. Worked into thread before sewing, it strengthened fiber and prevented rot in outdoor seams. Applied over cheese or cured meat, it extended shelf life by weeks. Worked into leather, it waterproofed and conditioned. Applied to a sticky drawer or squeaking hinge, it was the only lubricant most frontier households ever needed. Beeswax still performs all of these functions identically today. The material has not changed at all. What has been lost is the knowledge of what to do with it, the specific applications Grandma had memorized by age 12. The thing all 41 of these have in common. Not one skill on this list was invented by a single person. Not one was developed in isolation. Every technique, the root cellar ventilation, the fermentation timing, the smoke temperature, the filtration layers, the seed-saving method, was refined across generations by communities that transmitted knowledge as shared inheritance, not personal possession. Your great-grandmother knew how to build a root cellar not because she read about it. She knew because her mother showed her, and her mother's mother showed her, and the neighbor 2 farms over had a slightly better ventilation design and shared it freely, because in a world without margins, hoarding knowledge was the same as destroying it. The skill that makes every other skill on this list work is not a technique. It is not a tool or a supply cache or a seed envelope. It is the willingness to know your neighbors, to share what you know,
to show up when someone calls, not because there's a transaction involved, but because the community that survives a hard winter is the one where people already trust each other before the snow falls. Pick one skill from this list: the tallow candle, the sand filter, the wood ash soap, the root cellar ventilation. Learn it this month the way Grandma and Grandpa learned it, with your hands, not a screen. Then teach it to someone. Every skill on this list still works exactly as well as the day your great-grandmother first learned it from hers. The only thing that has to change is whether you know it.